Hi, this is Laura Susan Thomas. I'm the gallery director at the Ann Foxworthy Gallery on the Allan Hancock College campus. We're very excited this year to be offering some virtual art exhibits and experiences, and hope that you will enjoy tonight this replay of our very first virtual art talk with artist Marcos Dorado. He is an incredible artist, very thoughtful and beautiful work. So we also have a virtual exhibit space available to see his work on our website. You can visit that by putting into your search Ann Foxworthy Gallery, and there's a link to that virtual art space. So I hope you get a chance to see his work as well, and we hope that you enjoy this replay of the Artist Talk with Marcos Dorado.
Real pleasure to communicate to people in this whole new forum. And certainly appreciate your devotion and enthusiasm for art in general. And then, for having such a high opinion of my work, high enough to have me in this forum. So, yeah, it would have been amazing to be there in person, but obviously 2020 has taken a whole detour in Albuquerque and has gotten us in a different direction. And so here we are. But you know what? It's great to explore new avenues and new ways of communicating and sharing work and sharing ideas. And so I'll start by saying that should I share my screen now first of all? Do you think? Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can do this as smoothly as possible. And all right, I think I got it right.
That
Good.
looks great, Marcos. Yeah.
It looks good. Okay, great. All righty, super. So I brought in lots of images, given that I assumed that would be more entertaining for everyone. And so we'll start here. Let me go with my very first one. So I'll give you a little background on me. I was born in Mexico, in the state of Jalisco. You may not have heard of Jalisco, but the capital is Guadalajara, which most people have heard. It's the second largest city in Mexico. It's about probably 80% the size of LA. It's an enormous, enormous city. But if you look at my little map here, it's just 3 hours south is where Guadalajara is from where I was born. And I'll show you a little bit. So what we did is we took the bus and then came all along the Pacific coast all the way to Tijuana. And that was in 1974. I was born in 68. I'm 52 now. And I was 5 years old when my father returned. He was born in Mexico too. He was working out here in the Central Valley in Madera, which is just north of Fresno. And so he went to Mexico to pick us up and bring us to the United States. The only way that we can get across was illegally, because there was no legal recourse for us. There was no way for us to come here legally at all. And so this is my hometown in northern Jalisco. The name of it is Totatiche, which is a word in Nahuatl that I believe means the house of our Lord, I believe. And I was born. If you're looking at the screen, there was the screen. I was born closer to you in relationship to where you're seeing the city, the little town there. Even now it's only about 1,600 people that live in town, and it was like a 50-minute walk into town. I was born in the countryside, or grew up in the countryside, just like this. This is actually real close to the actual house where I lived, which doesn't exist anymore. Once we left in 78, no one else occupied the house, and so the house is pretty much falling apart from what I know. But this is where I played. This is where I ran around. My grandpa was a sharecropper. He grew corn, and he was also a master carpenter. And he lived until the age of 104, I believe, or 102, and 102, sorry, and he died in 2014. And so a little picture of me when I was about 1 year old, or a little older, I guess. And then this is my family in Mexico, minus my dad, who was not in this picture. He was in California at the time. I'm the tallest one, and then next is my sister Gloria, who's mildly handicapped. And then Mike, or Miguel, Mike was a little kid then. And then my mom was about 25 years old there. And then when we came up to Tijuana, this is Tijuana here on the right-hand side. You see a very famous bullfighting ring. And so on the left is the United States. So we took the bus all the way up to Tijuana. And this here is a fun picture. This on the other side of the fence is the United States, and to the right where the motorcycle is that's Mexico. This is called Avenida Internacional, or International Avenue. In 1974, this was a two-way street, and it didn't have this enormous fence, steel fence. It had a chain link fence, and in that chain link fence there was this opening. So we were instructed to take a taxi. So you can see where it says Tijuana there, to take a taxi and then get off and there at the avenue where there was a little store. So we just instructed the taxi to drop us off at the store. And then behind the store, we walk through, and everybody knows what a coyote is, a coyote, right? He's a person who helps immigrants cross illegally, was waiting for us there. Kind of a blondish guy. His name was Francisco. He went by Frankie. He was Mexican. And so we met him there, and then he just literally, it was just going right through the fence. It was that easy. And then we walked all the way across on the black line. We ran across I-5, and then there was a little neighborhood there. And then there we waited for the city bus, and that city bus took us to San Diego. And then we spent the night there. And then the following day we were driven to LA, and we spent a night there. And then the following day we were driven to Madera, California, and we arrived in Madera, which is again just north of Fresno, on March 2nd, 1974. It was a Saturday, and we arrived out here in the morning. I remember it was sprinkling, and I'm telling you, that was a whole different experience, because where I was born, think of the United States in 1890, and that's how I lived in Mexico in 1974. So coming here and seeing light bulb, and I had never seen a light bulb, had never seen a shower or a tub or a sink. I had never even heard the word television. So all of these things were quite different. We landed in Madera because my dad lived there. This is the original courthouse in Madera from about 100 years ago. And when I started school, I spoke absolutely no English, and there were no teachers that spoke English back then. There was two helpers there at Eastern Arcola Elementary who they said they were bilingual, but in reality they spoke Spanglish. And I had a very difficult time understanding them, because Spanglish is, everybody knows what Spanglish is, I'm sure. It's a combination of English and Spanish, which to this day I absolutely detest. I can't stand it. And part of the reason for my disdain for it is because when those nice ladies, Mrs. Cortez, and I can't recall the other lady's name, when they spoke to me again in Spanglish, and I didn't understand much of what they said, because there were words I had never heard. I remember one time they showed me a book of this parking lot in the store, and they were trying to assess my understanding and my intelligence, I guess. And so they tell me in Spanish to point to the parking lot. So she says, apunta al parqueadero. Parqueadero is park in English with the suffix in Spanish. Well, I had no clue what she was talking about. So to her, she was thinking, how can this little kid not know what a parking lot is? So then they thought that I had special needs. And then eventually they figured out that, in fact, I just spoke correct Mexican Spanish, and they spoke horrible, some mutation of the Spanish language that literally only people here understand. So it was pretty tough. Eventually, by the time I graduated from Madera High in 1987, I was fluent in English. I became fluent in French as well. And then I had the great fortune of studying literature in all three languages. So it was magnificent. And then I went to college, but I really didn't have direction. I really didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life. Eventually, to jump forward quite a bit, I was 30 years old and I had just gotten divorced. I have 3 sons. They're wonderful young men. And I decided to study art formally. I had always had some facility in drawing, and so what I did is I enrolled at the Art Students League in New York City. This is on 57th Avenue and Broadway, or between Broadway and 7th Street. Central Park is just on the other side of the building, and the adjacent corner is Carnegie Hall. So it's kind of cool because every time I stepped out for a little break, you see Carnegie Hall there. One time I tried to sneak in there. It was in the month of May, and all these graduations were happening. So you had all these students flooding in every single day from all these different schools. So I thought I'd sneak in there as a parent, but they asked me for my parent ID, and of course I didn't have it. So I went right back to my little break at the league and then resumed my school. But that was my one failed attempt to get into Carnegie. But it's pretty cool. I absolutely I adore New York City. I go there pretty much every year. Not this year. I had 2 trips planned, but both obviously got diverted. This is a drawing from the Art Students League. I've always been an enormous fan of realism when it comes to me doing art. I appreciate all different forms of art. I can go to an exhibit of abstract art or conceptual art or what have you, and I will appreciate them and I love them. A lot of my favorite artists are not even realists. But for me to create work, um, realism is what has always been in my heart. And so this drawing was one of the last ones that I did at the Art Students League as a student. The model's name is Amy, and this was a 3-hour session only. And so in the 3 hours, I jotted down, you can see here, all my little marks of how I was measuring and so forth. And then I made a bunch of notations on the shadows, kind of like the way you see over here on her legs. So those were on her arms, on her breasts, on her face, her head. And then I used those to develop and finish, or, to develop the drawing to this point later on from memory and then from the notations that I did. And then I exhibited this drawing in this fashion. And so I love incomplete drawings. Obviously, I like to see them completed too, but I have a good affinity to incomplete drawings. And so about an hour into the reception of this exhibit, a lady in her 40s came to it and she just loved it. I mentioned that she's in her 40s because she said, where I am in my life, I feel like this drawing is an analogy for it. There's the part that's very defined and complete, and then there's the part that makes you wonder, how is it going to look? And that feels like my life. How is my life going to continue? I know where I've been and what I have accomplished, but where am I going? And so she felt such a strong connection to it that she ended up purchasing this work. And so I was very grateful, and it really means a lot to me when a drawing means something like that to something meaningful to a potential buyer. This next drawing is a completed piece, as you can see. This is graphite on paper. The other one was also graphite on paper, and this is a salsa dancer who lives now in the Bay Area, and we did the drawing here. At the time, she was living in Fresno. And the only time that she had available was way after work. So we would meet at about 9:30 at night at her apartment, because that's what was easier for her. And we would work until about 11:30. And so we did this for about a month, because we did this piece and we did a few others for an exhibit. And so I ran into her just by chance, just a little bit over a year ago, and she was really happy to see me. And so she told me that she still has one of the drawings. It was kind of like a semi-nude that I did of her, and so she still has that. Now, this drawing, by the way, is now in a private collection in New York. And as I went on to develop as an artist, my last stint at the Art Students League as a student was 10 years ago. And so then I went on to be a professional and live exclusively from my drawing. And something that's very close to me is telling stories. It's something that I really gravitate to. I love to listen to people. I really love people altogether. And the more different they are to me, the more I am interested, because then I feel like I'm really going to learn something, and my life will be more enriched. And so I felt that through my art, the main thing that I needed to do was to communicate um, some kind of a narrative with my work. And so we were coming onto the election with the current administration, and there was a lot of negative rhetoric across the country against immigrants. You may recall Trump famously said, bad hombres, and he's used many derogatory terms towards immigrants and the countries from which we come from, not just Mexico, but Haiti and other countries. And so I thought, as an artist, one of the powers that I have, uh, and that's for any artist really, is whether they're visual or literary, uh, is that we have a voice and we can communicate ideas and concepts. And so I thought, as a juxtaposition to this negative rhetoric, I'll create an exhibit that promotes the positive side of immigration. And so I started with this project called Immigrant Me. And so it featured 25 drawn portraits, almost all of them life size. Um, and so, along with these portraits were stories that, like you can see this paper here, that's the little story of Fabio, who's the model there. And then over here is for Sandra. Sandra is from Guadalajara, Mexico. Fabio is from Honduras, the capital, which is Tegucigalpa. And so I ended up drawing 25 immigrants, and then have them tell whatever story they wanted to share. Some immigrants prefer to identify themselves as American only now, and they think of themselves as you know their past being a whole other life, and they really are interested only in seeing themselves as Americans, and that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. Others want to talk about why they came here or how they got here, or even if they came here legally, what it was like for them to then become a legal U.S. resident and then a U.S. citizen. So there were really amazing stories. This lady here behind me was part of that project. Her name is Ani, and her relatives were kicked out of Armenia during that horrible genocide from over 100 years ago, and they ended up settling in what is now the Gaza Strip. It was not called that then, or had the political polarity that it has now. And that's where she was born. Eventually, she came here, and you can't see it, but from there. But she's wearing earrings, and those earrings were a bracelet that her grandfather made. Her grandfather was stayed behind during the genocide because artists were allowed to stay in Armenia, or the Turkish allowed the Armenians to stay so that they can show Turkish how to create their work, artwork. And then once they learned, then they kicked out the artists. So her grandfather eventually was kicked out of Armenia and then joined the family. And when he passed away, Ani then kept that bracelet, and she had that bracelet converted into earrings, which she wears now. And she wanted to wear that for her portrait. But there were really amazing and very touching stories. Another one that I'll mention quickly here with Immigrant Me was that of Bill, who was born in Vienna as a Jew. And so once the Nazi occupation came in, he and his family were moved to a hotel that was, ironically enough, protected by Catholics. And if you know the history between the Jews and the Catholics, it's always been tumultuous and often fatal. And so in this case, the Catholics protected the Jews in this hotel. And at one point, the UK allowed for visas for Jewish mothers, and they can leave occupied Austria but it could only be them and one child that was 14 and under. Bill had an older sister, but he was 13 and the sister was older. So the sister and her father stayed behind. The mother and Bill left and moved to London. And they were set up with a family there. Really interesting story is that he was a bookworm. So one day he went to return his book to the library there in London. Before getting to the library, which was 1 block away at this point, he stepped into a cafe. During World War II, the cafes, he said, only served coffee and toast with beans on it. So that's what he ordered. While he sat down and ordered, and while he sat down and eat, a Nazi bomb landed on the library where he would have been had he not stopped in for his beans and coffee. Eventually, he came to the United States, and then he was married here, and he has a couple of daughters. One of them is an opera singer in San Francisco. He is 84 years old, but really, you think he was 60, and he's a painter, and he still travels everywhere. He's got this greatest smile and a very warm heart. So it was really special for me to share the stories through Immigrant Me, because it gave people a whole different perspective about what immigrants are and how we get here and why we come here. This photo here shows Sandra. Sandra is this young lady here, and so this shows my working with Sandra. I draw directly from life. I always do my very best to never work from photographs. There are times when I have to, if I'm commissioned to do a portrait of someone that's deceased, or maybe a husband wants a surprise portrait of his wife, or for her. Otherwise, I always insist on drawing from life. And so here I am measuring the width of Sandra's shoulders, which you can see where my marks have been here already. So this mark here coincides with her shoulder, this one with the other shoulder. You can see this is where her shorts go, or pants, sorry. And so anyways, I'm taking measurements there so that I can then walk up to the canvas and then draw on it. And so shows another angle of me then drawing her. And then when the drawing was a little bit more developed, using charcoal pencil to draw directly on the canvas. And then a smiley picture of Sandra and I as during one of our sessions. If there's any questions, I can take a question here. If there's any that are relating to Immigrant Me or the drawing here with the process that I use. If not, I'll just keep going. And so, alrighty. And so then, so here's the finished piece, which is featured in the virtual gallery. And so this piece is life size. Obviously, it doesn't show her whole figure. And going on to the next one, this is Fabio. He now lives in San Francisco, but he was living here in Fresno. He was born in Honduras, as I mentioned earlier. His father passed away when he was young. His mother then married a Croatian national who was living in Honduras, and then the family, being his stepfather, his mother, he and his older sister, who just graduated from Cornell University, legally immigrated from Honduras to Louisiana, and then he grew up there, and then eventually they made their way to Fresno, California. And like I mentioned earlier, he now lives in San Francisco. This is a more developed level of this portrait. It's life size. And so then if we go to the next one, you see him side by side. As I mentioned, the portrait is life size, but with the camera lens, you see the drawing there much smaller than it really is. But we thought we'd do this one so we can show the comparison of the drawing to the real picture of him, and then also the accuracy of it. I use a technique usually. I use various techniques when I draw, but for these life-size ones, I use a technique called sight size. And that is drawing whatever you are seeing exactly at the size at which you see it. So that when a drawing is complete, you could stand in front of the drawing and viewing the subject, whether it's a still life or a person, and it would look identical in size and shape, etc. Literally, it would look exactly the same, put side by side, the drawing with the actual subject.
Marcos, we have a
Uh-huh.
questions about what you're discussing right now. Is it okay to
Yeah,
interject?
yeah.
The first question is how Monica Buenrosto is asking, how do you find the people you feature in Immigrant Me?
Uh-huh. Oh, uh, social media is amazing. First of all, being here in California, I'm not going to be short of them. And I know many of them from various countries. In, by promoting this on social media, people would chime in, maybe their husband is an immigrant or their wife, you know. Um, One day I run a lot. And so in the mornings. And so one day I was in this one of my runs, and this I stopped to stretch, and this gardener started talking to me. It turns out that he's Irish and from Ireland, and his wife is Mexican, but the wife is the one who was born here, and so she's the one who helped the Irishman immigrate. So it's kind of like in reverse. Usually, if we see a white and Mexican couple, it's usually the white person that immigrates the Mexican. In this case, it was the Mexican immigrating the white partner. We ended up not working, the gentleman and I, but I meet them, and when I'm drawing small works, I usually, instead of staying in the studio, I go out to Starbucks or some other cafe, because one, I like movement and I like people, and then people always want to see a drawing. And so if someone's drawing, they always want to see, like, oh, what are you doing? It's a great way to communicate. So during those moments, I end up gaining models or art collectors, or someone 2 years later calls me and say, "Are you still the artist I met? I would like for you to do a portrait." And then there's $1,500 that I gained just because I talked to someone 2 years earlier, and that person kept my card. And then, like I said, social media, really helps out. And so I meet people, and then we discuss. I tell them what the project is about, and then usually people want to share whatever it is that they wish to communicate, um, for the project. Any other questions at the moment?
I had a quick question for
Uh,
you. You mentioned that you're drawing these life size. Was there a purposeful thought behind drawing them life size for this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, the reason is because I wanted people to have a greater impact when seeing these faces, these people. We always generalize. We're all guilty of generalizing. We say, kids, we know what kids are doing, or we know what an 8-year-old does. Well, it's just we all know we do that with ethnicities as well. We all know what the Mexicans do, you know and he's Mexican, he's going to eat tamales at Christmas. And guess what? That's true, I am going to eat tamales at Christmas. And so, but we can these are positive generalizations. Obviously there's negative ones too. And so what I wanted is for people to read these stories and then realize that we're all people, and we're all in the pursuit of happiness. We really are, most of us, right? And we all want to be responsible and independent. It's just that some are by chance born here. They didn't do anything to be American. They were just came to life. They took a breath, and there you are. You're a U.S. citizen. You didn't really do too much to become that, because you're lucky enough to be already an American, and that's fantastic, because then you're already here, and then you can promote this culture and make America greater in your community too. But some of us didn't have that, and so we were born in a different country, and then things were not as positive and as progressive and beneficial, advantageous, and so we had to find a way to move somewhere else where where we can do that. And, you know, I mean, that's the history of white America to begin with, right? Why did the Puritans come here? They didn't come here because it was an amazing place. They didn't even know what it looked like, but they left because of religious persecution, you know, right? And then they came here and unfortunately infringed on the population that was here. The interesting thing is that America sees those Puritans as heroes and as brave people, and then we have the rhetoric about us Mexicans who come here as being something not so positive and not as courageous. But you know, we do come here and we try to figure it out. But I wanted to make them life size because I wanted it to be more like a real person, and to for it to have a greater impact by the dimensions rather than it just being something small. Also, all of these drawings were not framed. The amazing curator for the Fresno Art Museum, where this was exhibited as a solo show, Mrs. Michelle Ellis Tracy, she and I both agreed that it would make a more impactful presentation if they were not shown behind glass. And you know, some were on canvas, some were on paper, and that's a very fragile, like this one here. I mean, this one showed exactly like this, and so we wanted it to be that way because then it looks more vulnerable, you know, because you don't want to, you know, cough on it or sneeze on it. But I will really wanted to have that for each viewer walking up and seeing like, wow, that is the drawing. It's not through glass that I'm seeing it. And so again, I think that that made a greater impact with the presentation.
Marcos, you were talking about the substrate that you're drawing on. Our one of our faculty who teaches life drawing posed the question: what kind of paper are you using for these
Uh,
incredible pieces?
yeah, thank you. This particular one is on canvas, but when I draw on paper, especially when I draw large, and this paper is a great example of that, though this is not big, is one of the few that was not life size. When I draw large, then I draw, excuse me, I order from, it's called Fabriano. It's Fabriano Artistico. There's lots of Fabriano paper. I guess Fabriano is kind of like saying Toyota. Like I drive a Toyota, but what is that? A Toyota Tacoma, Camry, or what kind of a Toyota? So Fabriano is that the general brand, and then each individual little name has its own qualities. And so I tested a whole bunch of different papers for its strength, its weight, its tooth. If you don't know what tooth is in paper, it's how rough or how smooth it is. Because all of these things determine how it's going to accept the graphite or pastel or charcoal, whatever it is that you use to draw, or ink. This particular drawing here with Fabio is actually ink, Conte, charcoal, and graphite. But going back to paper, yeah, I draw in this Fabriano. I also draw in Strathmore, which you can get at any Michael's art supply store. And then I also draw in this paper that is no longer made, unfortunately. If you go to my website and you look at a self-portrait and then one of my mother, that paper is from the United States, and it's a company in New Jersey. But unfortunately, the company still continues, but many of us are just super bummed that they discontinued this paper. So can't get. Luckily, I still have some because I purchased about 100 sheets of them, and then I'm going to be out of it pretty soon. So yeah, any other questions? Yeah, okay, good. So once the exhibit finished, Immigrant Me at the Fresno Art Museum, it went on view from January 18th through the middle of June of 2018. It was 6 months. Then I really wanted to continue telling more stories about immigrants. But drawings take a long time, and I was already working on this other exhibit that is actual full-length, life-size nudes of men and women. And this would be an exhibit later on, and it's going to be published as a book by Split Oak Press. So this drawing here of Fabio took 80 hours to draw. And so I thought, well, geez, I don't really have that much time to devote to drawing more portraits of immigrants. So I had recently picked up a camera and began to study photography. So I decided to convert then Immigrant Me into a documentary through photography. And so this is one of the first portraits that I did. This gentleman here, his name is Bruno. And oh, I remember earlier I mentioned that sometimes people call me after meeting me at a bookstore. He's one of those people. It had been about 2 or 3 years. I get a phone call from him and he says, "Are you Marcos?" I say, "Yes." To make the long story short, he and his wife had been looking for a drawing of a large drawing of a nude to go above their bed in their bedroom, and they went to uh, a few cities in the U.S. and they just didn't find anything that they wanted. And so then he remembered, wait a minute, I met this artist at a Starbucks in Fresno. So he gave me a call. I couldn't remember who he was because it had been 2 or 3 years. So finally we met, and it turned out to be him. And so um, with Sandra, who you just saw those drawings, she ended up being the nude model for this particular piece. To give you an idea, just by that conversation that he and I had, years ago, and then the phone call later on, that ended up being a good $3,600 in my pocket. So drawings can be, nice and lucrative. And then if you're open to meeting people and you're polite and nice and a gentleman, and you end up with a lot more connections than you would otherwise. So here we have Bruno as part of the new face of Immigrant Me, which is through photography. And so the 30-second version of his story is he came to the United States as an engineer from Switzerland to build tunnels underneath New York City. Now, these tunnels are not for the subway. They are for plumbing and for electrical type of stuff. So public doesn't go there. So he helped build those in the 60s. And then while he was on a trip, I believe, to California, he ended up meeting Elizabeth, with whom he's married now. Turns out she's also from Switzerland. And so they've been both married since the 60s, and they are both just fantastic people. And so this young lady here is Yesenia. She is from Oaxaca. And so she and her husband and their super adorable little son are both here in the United States, and they're entrepreneurs, and they're doing pretty well. And so I still need to interview her, so I can't tell you too much about her life, unfortunately, at this moment. But this is a wonderful subject for sure. And this smiley lady is Melinda. She lives in the Bay Area. And it's another person that I met at another cafe. I was working on some drawing, and then she came up, and it turns out she's a painter, aspiring painter. And so she wanted to, just ask me questions about drawing. And through our conversation, we became friends, and then discovered that she's from Slovakia. And so then later on, I asked her if she would be a part of Immigrant Me, because, most of the, immigrants are from every country, of course. And I figured, wow, I've never met anyone from Slovakia, and I bet a lot of people have not either. And so it'd be really interesting to get her story. Mexicans get a lot of the attention here, Mexican immigrants, anyways, certainly in the Central Valley. But European immigrants are not often in the news as much as those of us from south of the border. Um, so I'm now in the midst of developing the documentary through photography, but of course we ended up with coronavirus, and so that put a halt on everything. I stopped drawing. I stopped going to the studio, for obvious reasons. And then for a while, I wasn't sure, like, okay, well, what can I do? I don't want to meet with people. It's not safe. Now that, we kind of gotten the handle of how to move about this world in a safer way, I feel like it's a little bit not timely to talk to people about their immigrant experience, because I feel like everyone is a little bit more concerned of how they're going to get through the day, or if their mom is sick with the virus or what have you. And so then I decided that I'll put Immigrant Me on hold, and then I will resume with it after the pandemic. It's a bummer because, obviously then we miss out on the exhibit there with you at Allan Hancock College, but also it ended up putting a hold at the Museum of Social Justice in LA, where I was already in talks with the director about showing Immigrant Me as a solo exhibit through photography. But we'll get through it, and then we'll see where we go. And as soon as it's safe again, I will resume with this project. And so what I'm doing now is I'm working exclusively with my camera, and about 99% of the time I'm working outdoors, except for this particular time. This was in LA. I went to LA to do an editorial. Perhaps some of you might not be too aware of what an editorial is. An editorial is a collection of photographs with a specific subject, and it can be just photographs, or it could be photographs with some kind of a statement with them, with each one, commentary, or it could be photographs in an article, some kind of a story about the subject in the photographs. And so in this case, there is an amazing clothing designer. Her name is Paulina, who lives in LA, and she designs very Mexican-oriented type of clothing. And so I went to shoot 3 different models there. She rented this big old studio space. It's an enormous area, so I felt safe enough to be there. I kept the mask on, but it became so insanely hot there that I was just drenched. You can see I have a little towel there because I had to just be wiping off all of the time. So that's that model, posing in the style of Frida Kahlo. I'm sure you might all be aware of the amazing Mexican painter. This is her. Paulina rented a car so that it could be there in the studio. And so this is Mari, who's posing after a change of clothes. So this is Paulina's design, and this is Paulina's design as well. And this young lady is Jacqueline Del Valle, and obviously also posing wearing Paulina's attire. And so I really enjoy putting together these editorials. I'm working on some that I'm submitting to magazines for publication. And in fact, I'm in talks right now with an editor in LA about doing editorials for her magazine, hopefully beginning later this fall. This is also Jacqueline posing in the car. And then this is, we got about probably 5 more images. This is another editorial that I am putting together. This one is of the Tower District here in Fresno. The Tower District is kind of like the cool little hippie area to be in Fresno. There's lots of clubs and restaurants and live music venues, festivals like Pride happens there every June, and Mardi Gras and such. Excuse me a second. It also has these really cool murals throughout the Tower District. And so we thought that we would go. There's this little lot there. This is right by Fresno City College, actually. And this is my beautiful fiance, Lupe, who is an attorney. And she's been doing modeling since she was a teenager. She used to do fashion modeling. Her mother got her into it so that, to help her develop and grow and have new enriching experiences. And so she's back to modeling, and she and I work a lot together. She works with other photographers as well. And so we thought it'd be awesome to do this power girl pose there and in front of this mural. This is during the same shoot, but on the main strip of the Tower District, which is Olive Avenue. And so she's posing there with her Ghost concert jacket. Anyone here a fan of Ghost, the band? They're pretty cool. They put amazing shows. And this is Kyle. Kyle's fantastic. He's actually Fabio's best friend. And I love working with Fabio. Fabio. Well, yeah, I love working with Fabio too, but Kyle's really awesome. He tends to be pretty shy, and he follows direction exactly the way he should. He doesn't know much about posing. Most of these people that you see here have no experience in posing. Some do, and I love developing poses. And so here you can see we used a little part of a wall here to block him out a little bit, so he's not so squared up. And then we got some nice, really nice little color palette going here with a lot of greens and some of those yellows. And we got green on him, and of course we got some of the oranges on this natural pigment of skin, with the black shirt there serving to really separate him from the surrounding of the frame. Plus, I love his long hair. He looks really super cool, I think. So this was a pretty fun shoot with him. And I think I have another portrait of him in the virtual exhibit when you go and view it. This is an amazing performer. She does a lot of acrobatic stuff, burlesque. She just got into it since she was a young lady, and has really developed into quite a performer, and performs throughout the U.S. She now lives in Colorado, but her mother lives here, and so she was visiting a couple of weeks ago, and so we got together to shoot her there in the Tower District. And so you can see she wore one of her really awesome costumes. Incidentally, I'm writing an article about her, which will be published next week on my website, dorado.photography. And that cool, that red hair is just a killer. It's awesome. This is her too, in another mural of the Tower District. She absolutely loves this one, and I think it looks pretty awesome as well. And so, yeah, it's pretty fun. The name of the editorial is Models in the Tower District, and so I'm not necessarily putting the focus on the Tower District. It's a little bit more of the focus of the models within the imagery of the Tower District. And this is Shirley. That's a record store right behind her. And I really like this pose quite a bit. Again, it just turns out that she was wearing just the perfect colors here to go with these blues and yellows. And then we're back to my fiance here for the last image. And again, this is also in the Tower District. At the moment, I'm thoroughly enjoying doing these editorials. I have quite a few coming up. In fact, there'll be a model from the Bay Area coming down here for a shoot. We'll do the shoot, and then the subject of her article is going to be her bouts with anxiety and depression. And so in the photos, she's going to look all sexy and modelish, but the juxtaposition will be, a not so happy subject. But I like that juxtaposition because in a way it mirrors life. How many times do we know someone at work or at school and we see them smiling and joking and being jovial all the time, and then we find out that over the weekend they made an attempt at their life, or they're all of a sudden not functioning well because they're so depressed. And then we think like, wow, I see Bill always cracking up. I can't believe that he's feels this way. And so for that reason, I'm taking that approach with the editorial. Again, really nice pictures of her being a model in downtown Fresno, probably. And then a subject matter that's a little different than what we see. And then in 2 weeks, I'll be back in LA. I'm going to be doing an editorial of Stephanie Valencia, who is an awesome rocker. She's a rock star in Spanish, and she was nominated for a Latin Grammy Award recently, or not long ago. And it'll be really super cool to do a shoot of her along with an article. And the attire that she's going to wear will be to mirror her new single and video, which comes out actually tomorrow. So it'll be pretty exciting. So I think this takes me to about the end of where we would want to talk.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcos. This is really amazing presentation, and the way your work, it just delves deeply into who people are, is just a beautiful thing to see. Really wonderful. Thank you so much.
For sure.
And we do have a few questions that
Certainly.
chat that I would love to pass by you. One question from Cynthia is she asked if any of your immigrant models have had the opportunity to be present at any of at any of your showings, and what was their reaction to seeing these portraits, in a art space like that?
Yeah. Wow. I'll bring up a great story. It's actually a very touching one. And the answer is yes. All of them from the drawing exhibit at the Fresno Art Museum when it was a solo show. In fact, that night, the director, Michelle, told me that there were 500 people that came to the reception. So there was quite a bit of people, and the models attended. I'll share one touching story. There's a gentleman, Josef Rieping. He was born in Germany and was, I think, 8 years old when the Nazis took over. And so when the war ended, the part of Germany where he was born and where he was living and his family became Poland or Austria. I think it was Poland. And as part of retribution, for the war. So now all of a sudden they're no longer in Germany. They are now in Poland. And the Polish absolutely at that time detested anyone that was German. They wouldn't hire you. They wouldn't even say hi to you. They would abuse you in all kinds of different ways, according to the stories that I was told. And so the family decided to leave Poland and go and walk something like 35 kilometers or 35 miles, 35 kilometers, which ends up being probably about 20 miles, to some little town in Germany where they knew that some relative lived and they hoped that that relative was still alive after the war. So they crossed the border illegally from Poland into Germany, and then luckily they found that family, that relative. He grew up, and when he was 18, he thought, wow, there's no work here. I mean, Germany was in shambles after World War II. And so he had some relative living just outside of New York City. So to make a long story short, he got a passport and flew to New York. He hated New York because Josef is 100% a country boy. And so he could not stand New York. And so then his uncle told him, well, we have some relatives in Gilroy, California. Of course, he had never heard of Gilroy. Who has, right? From Germany. And no offense to Gilroy, but it's a tiny, tiny little place. Just like most people in Poland probably have never heard of Fresno, even though it's 500,000 people here where I live. And so he then got on a plane because they told him, well, there's a lot of dairies and there's farms and there's garlic in Gilroy. So he was on the next plane to Gilroy. Well, along the way, what happened is because he was a German national, in order for him to become a U.S. resident, he had to serve 2 years in the U.S. Army. So he served in the Army. That gave him his citizenship. He moves to Gilroy. And then he's a devout Catholic, absolutely 100% devout Catholic. He's as Catholic as he is German. And so he ended up moving to Madera because of dairy and farm work. And through the Catholic Church, he ended up going to some fundraiser in a town called Selma, which is about 45 minutes from Madera. This is in 1962. And so there they had mariachi and folkloric dancers. And so he sees this Mexican young lady in, the traditional mariachi folkloric dance attire. And he was like, wow, I had never seen a lady look like that. So he was super excited to meet her, but didn't get to. 2 weeks later, he met her at another church function. They ended up getting married. And they were together until 5 years ago when the lady passed away from cancer. So after his wife died, Mrs. Rieping, who was from my home state, actually, Jalisco. Then his rhetoric became, whenever the Lord wants to take me, I will go. I'm ready to pass away. I just want to go and be with my Carmen again. And all of his 7 children, who all look absolute German, you would never guess that they're half Mexican. Whatever your idea of a white classic German face is, that's all of that family, but they're half Mexican. And you know, the kids, well, not kids, they're adults now. They're all mourning the mother's death, and then they're hearing the father say, "But gee, I just want to go back and be with my beloved Carmen again." It was a little hard for them to keep hearing the father say that over and over. So then, when I chose him to for a portrait for Immigrant Me, then when he finally got the idea that, wait a minute, this is going to be at a museum, then his dialogue changed to, boy, I don't want to die now. I want to live to at least go see my exhibit at the museum. And so then his whole motive for living was to live long enough to see himself at see his portrait in a museum. And then the curator, the way that they organized it is that his picture was the very first one, right when you enter. It was the centerpiece of the exhibit. And so then everybody was coming to see him, and he became this big old rock star that night because he's in his 80s, but he's got the most amazing sense of humor. He just cracks you up. And so, you know, with this big life-size portrait of him right at the very beginning with his very German face, you know, he wore a traditional Bavarian attire, which he wore to the exhibit itself. He was just absolutely over the moon with being praised for you know, his life and his being here in the United States. It was quite a touching evening for him.
Well, Marcos, I thank you so much for sharing your stories and your journey and your art with us tonight. It's just been amazing, and there's been a lot of wonderful comments. People really enjoyed the care and the empathy that you have with your subjects. And I really want to invite everybody to check out our virtual gallery of Marcos's work. It's really beautiful, and it'll allow you to spend a little more time with each piece. And there's links to your website on there, Marcos, the websites, and some informational links as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to share with us tonight, Marcos.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here. And thanks everyone for sticking around. I really appreciate your presence, and I hope it's been informative and enjoyable to you.
Yeah.
And feel free to send me a message if you like. You can find me on Instagram at Marcos Dorado. Send me a message, ask me a question. I'm always here, and I'll be happy to respond. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Marcos. And thank you guys for coming. Well, do we come out to a Zoom? Thank you for Zooming out tonight. There's a lot of things going on, and it's kind of nice to take an hour off to see some beautiful work and connect. So thank you for coming, and hopefully we'll have some more virtual exhibits this year and virtual talks. So we hope to see you again soon. Thank you again. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Marcos.
Yes, and be safe, everyone.